So welcome everybody to Discover Alaska, and tonight we are going to talk about drones. And legitimately, I'm well away from everybody. So in terms of what we're going to talk about tonight, we're going to talk about drones, we're going to talk about their impacts, what we potentially could be doing with them in Alaska, and the fact that we are one of the world leaders in terms of a program up here at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. So with that, let's go ahead and get going. So those of you who've heard me talk before know that I didn't like the term drones because it implied mindless, boring, etc. There were some negative connotations about that. Unfortunately, that has now taken over the lexicon, and now they are known as drones. So, got filed under nice attempt, but unmanned was not inclusive, and therefore we've gotten rid of it. So you'll notice that our program used to be the Alaska Center for Unmanned Aircraft Systems Integration. We are now just ACUASI. So we'll be forever spelling it, but we are now ACUASI. So let's start, for those of you who aren't familiar with what we're doing. What is a drone? So a lot of people think about the little camera drones you can buy at Costco and fly around and take pictures, or you think about military drones. Well, the answer is it's those and a whole host of other different kinds. What's important about a drone? Well, they're kind of fun to play with. But if you happen to have a drone and you just go out and you fly it, all you're doing is burning holes in the sky. If you really want it to be useful, what you need to do with it is collect data. So we put payloads on the drones. And if you buy, one of those DJI products, it comes with a really nice camera. That's your payload. It could be a gas sniffer. It could be a LiDAR to do mapping. There's a whole range of different things it could be. And that payload is going to be what makes you money. But that payload has to be integrated into your aircraft. You don't want it hanging, swinging wildly because it's going to take down your aircraft. You want to make sure that it works. It's going to survive. You're moving around. We had a system called ScanEagle. It had 12 Gs on launch and 20 hours endurance. So what happened when the payload broke on launch? You had 20 hours not acquiring any data. That is a problem. So you need to make sure that it is integrated well and that you have a good data link so you can take a look at it and make sure that it is working. We also need to be able to command and control it. We need to tell it what to be able to do in this particular period where we are not to full autonomy yet. So we always have a human in the loop, or in some cases, a human, what they call on the loop, monitoring from outside. So that command and control is important. And here in Alaska, that is one of our big issues, because we don't have cell phone coverage everywhere. A lot of the folks in the lower 48, oh great, we're just going to go fly our drone, and it's all command and control via cell phone. Well, if you're up on the Dalton Highway, that's not going to work. So how do you maintain that contact with your drone over long distances? It's an area of our research. All of this comes together when you happen to have a good team to support it. Now, if you've got a little one you're playing for fun, it can be you by yourself. If you happen to have a case where you've got something that happens to be the size of a Cessna Grand Caravan, you're talking about a whole lot more people involved in terms of pilots, and you're going to have folks who do maintenance. So we have some systems that when we send a team out, it's 5 people to run an unmanned aircraft, to run a drone. So you have to have all of these things to really make this work. So we have a drone fleet here at UAF. Now, the top 2 happen to be DJI. DJI products, not approved for government use in terms of military, etc. Why? They're from China. So there are a bunch of security issues. So we fly those for students and for public relations. When we do real work, we use other systems. So the pretty white and blue aircraft in the middle on the left, that's our Sea Hunter. 16-foot wingspan, about 300 pounds maximum takeoff weight, about 12.5 hours endurance. The one to the right is our helicopter responder. She's got about a meter blade, makes an amazing whoop sound when she starts up, Everybody backs up, but she's good for about 35, 40 minutes electric, and we've used her for search and rescue, river ice breakup, and a bunch of other missions. Bottom right is Sentry. Why do we love Sentry? Sentry is a 400-pound, 12-foot wingspan aircraft, and it was the one we flew off of Fairbanks International Airport a month ago. So very exciting on that front. And the bottom left is something called the Perimeter. Well, the Perimeter is about 33 pounds. What's unique about that one? It's a gas-electric hybrid. So we actually, when a quadcopter that's electric would give you about 30 minutes endurance, this aircraft has a minimum of 5 hours endurance. Huge difference. Lets us go a lot of other places. Plus, if you happen to have a gas engine, you can often work at cooler temperatures. So we're constantly evaluating what we're doing. We also do some weird stuff on this front. So here are some aircraft that we have flown or are preparing to fly. So top left, people recognize that. That's a traditional Cessna Grand Caravan. We are working with teams that have unmanned this aircraft. So it does not need a pilot on board. We also have the bottom right. That is Facebook's Aquila. And it was a 131-foot wingspan. Oh, it says 140 here. I need to read my own slides. And it was designed to go up into the stratosphere and loiter. We only flew it on test flights in Yuma, Arizona, but we can honestly say we have flown a 140-foot wingspan aircraft. So, drones. Why do we care other than having fun? Well, there's a whole bunch of different uses, a whole bunch of different ideas. And usually if I've got little kids, I have all the kids shout them out. So we're going to go with the older folks here now. So everybody who's over, we'll go with 12. Ideas on what we use drones for? Just shout them out.
Search and rescue.
Search and rescue.
For the fires that are going on.
Firefighting, yes. Delivering pizza. Mapping. Thermal. All of these are really good answers. The answer is there is a whole bunch of different uses. And if you get little kids going on this, they come up with the most amazing uses. And the thing is, most of them are possible. The challenge is right now, the technology and the regulatory conditions aren't quite ready for us to go fly freely and do all of them. So we are working with the FAA to step by step get the technologies and move things forward. And we have gone and done a whole bunch of interesting test flights. Top left, wildfire. That is the Scan Eagle at the Crazy Mountain Fires in 2009. The center was looking at walrus and trying to determine with biologists at what point the walrus would get scared to make sure that we never flew below that point to ensure that we would not cause a stampede and scare the walrus. That top right picture, the thing in the top right corner, is not actually a picture. That is a whole bunch of laser points that come together to develop a three-dimensional model of the bridge. 1 to 2 millimeter resolution. We could read the bolts on the bridge. We could see whether or not it was built correctly. And the answer was, it wasn't built to spec. Bottom right, that happens to be our responder, the helicopter, flying off of the National Park Service vessel, the Sirach. And I'm going to point out Nick Adkins in the audience here. Nick was the pilot for this mission. So this is one that he will be giving grief about forever. Because you can't fly in a national park when the tourists happen to be watching the glacier because it detracts from the experience. So they'd fly in the morning, they'd fly in the afternoon. Middle of the day, they couldn't do anything. So what'd they do? They went fishing.
Yep.
They caught fish. They didn't bring the boss any fish. So the boss sends pictures of 5 guys from other places in the country, just as retaliation. But they went and monitored, now I'm going to draw a complete blank. Thank you, Ayala Glacier. Mile glacier front. They did a 3-dimensional map. That is what is on the left. So that we can create a 3-dimensional model, look at crevasses, look how things change. Bottom left, that is a flare stack up in the North Slope. So we can fly an unmanned aircraft and look at it in thermal and look at it in visible and determine what parts need to be replaced. Have them ordered, have them arrive on site, and only then do they need to take the oil field down to do that change. Saves millions of dollars. We piloted it. It is now being done commercially because the university cannot compete with commercial interests because we're taxpayer funded. It's an unfair advantage. But it shows that we spin things off to Alaskan companies, which is part of what we're supposed to do, is support the state. Bottom middle is kind of fun. That's out at Poker Flat, so northeast of Fairbanks. It is a test basin. It is designed for doing oil spill tests, and in that particular case, they have the pond of water. They put fake icebergs in it. Those are the gray things. They had real icebergs, and then they melted. So they had to go with fake icebergs. They dropped oil in it. They went by with one unmanned aircraft, put in a chemical that caused the oil to clump together, went by with another unmanned aircraft with a torch and lit it on fire. Guess what? In situ oil spill remediation without ever having to have a person on site. You can start the remediation before anybody actually gets there. And in the middle, that project, we were working with NASA on how do you communicate into a common system at sites all across the country at the same time. So every test site in the country, and there's 7 of us, had unmanned aircraft in the air at the same time, all feeding into the same system. So that is part of what they call UAS traffic management, or UTM. And it has gotten a whole lot better since we did these first tests. So, ACUASI, what are we? Well, we're the Center of Excellence for the university in drones. And we really have 3 major things we do. We're assisting the FAA in the SAFE, and SAFE is a key word in everything we do. Integration of drones into the National Airspace System. We are supporting Alaskan industry and users, and that's everybody from Alyeska Pipeline Service Company to the military. And we're conducting scientific research. Because of course, well, we're at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. We have the best researchers in the world. So they have ideas on missions, payloads, all these other things that we can work with them on. So our goal is complete integration. So in this case, that is our Sea Hunter. Matt Westhoff is nicely demonstrating how big she is. We are flying off the same runway as that cargo aircraft. We are being treated just like any other aircraft. That's exciting, and that's what we want to see. We're also, of course, developing the payloads to go on those aircraft. So we have done detect and avoid, and I will tell you more about detect and avoid in a moment. But the key thing is for detect and avoid is you have a system on board your aircraft that can spot another aircraft in the airspace and autonomously avoid it. Why would that be important in Alaska? Because our command and control links can be challenging. So if we lose contact with that aircraft, our aircraft still will not hit another aircraft. So this is the holy grail in terms of safety. And we are leading the testing. So we're one of the prime places for folks to test. We also have gas sensors. We've got mapping payloads. I've told you already, we do flares. And this is just an example. So this is a commercial thermal camera created by FLIR. And we put it on one of our unmanned aircraft. And that is a vessel in Homer. And you can tell where the engines are because of the heat through the side of the ship. You can see the people. If you look closely enough, I am in the top group. You can tell because I'm the one wearing a skirt. And it shows. So it's a case where something very simple, when properly integrated, can give you a lot of information. And not to mention we're a university, so we're cheap. So we can go buy the $100,000 camera system. No, we're going to go buy the $5,000 one and integrate it ourselves. Who are we? We're one of the weirdest bunches you're ever going to encounter in the university. We have veterans and former defense contractors. We also have scientists and engineers. We have faculty, staff, and students. We have pilots. We have a business developer. We have a retired FAA air traffic control flight service specialist. And I'm going to point out Tom here. Tom is our FAA whisperer. He can get permissions out of the FAA nobody else can get because he speaks FAA fluently. He also has the patience of a saint because their program is one of the worst we've ever encountered. So what this really means is we are basically running a military flight wing as a business in the university. Best and worst of all worlds. But it means we have a very diverse team with a whole bunch of opinions. And if I hit the same place of this is what we should be doing as one of our retired Army guys, we've gotten there two completely different directions, so we're probably where we should be. But it's that kind of discussion and that type of interaction that makes this job so much fun. We have a lot of military experience, as I said. We have thousands and thousands of hours of flight time in our team. So it's a nice way to go from military to civilian in terms of expertise. The FAA recognizes that expertise. So the FAA has three major programs. They have the test sites. Well, we lead one of the 7. They have the FAA Center of Excellence for UAS Research. We are one of the 15 core universities. And we're part of what's called the Beyond program. And the Beyond program started as the integration pilot program that was designed to accelerate the use of unmanned aircraft into the airspace. And when that program sunsetted, the FAA realized in the process of that program, the IPP, that they weren't as far ahead as they thought they were. And this was not going to be as easy as they thought it was. But they really liked the interactions with the people who'd been in that program. And the program had originally 10 participants, and it was chosen from 149 programs across the country. So highly competitive, and we had one of the top teams. So one group fell out. They were doing mosquitoes in Florida. When Beyond started, everyone was given the option to keep working on these challenges under the Beyond program, and one program dropped out, and so now there are 8 of us. So we are the elite. We're part of the Beyond program. But the most important thing is ACUASI is the only place in the country where all 3 programs are in one entity, which is great for trying to break between silos in the programs. It also means we're schizophrenic, because what hat I'm wearing on any given day varies tremendously. The other thing is they have so much confidence in us. We were asked to join the Beyond Visual Line of Sight Aviation Rulemaking Committee. Anytime you're dealing with an aviation rule committee, means you're in the room where it happens. You are helping provide the recommendations that will lead to laws, rules, and regulations. I'm on the Advanced Aviation Advisory Committee, formerly known as the Drone Advisory Committee. Advanced Aviation, why'd they switch it? Because it's going to be so much more than drones. It's going to be a fully integrated ecosystem with traditional aviation, drones. You're going to have what they call urban air mobility, which is the air taxis. You have large unmanned aircraft cargo, all of those different things together. So they don't want to be limiting to just drones. So it is now the AC, one of the world's worst acronyms, but we all make fun of it. So that Aviation Rulemaking Committee, there's no interest in drones whatsoever, right? 89 organizations were chosen to be involved in this. That's 89 organizations trying to reach consensus. Everything from airline pilots to true tech innovators. Full range. Lots of discussion, lots of interesting interactions. The recommendations are out now. It's caused all sorts of various consternation. Did we reach consensus? No. We tried. We reached consensus with most groups. And so when you read the report, they have the whether or not you agreed, or basically whether or not you could live with it. And then you had the people who couldn't, and they had dissenting opinions, kind of like the Supreme Court. So reading how everybody fell out is actually really pretty funny. But this was important. This was focused on small unmanned aircraft below 400 feet. That is not really the sweet spot for what we want to do in Alaska. We want to do higher, and we want to do bigger. But we wanted to make sure they didn't screw up the higher and bigger in the process of fixing the below. The other thing is Alaska is unique. We are an aviation state, and most places, if you're sparsely populated, you can fly under 500 feet in a normal aircraft. Well, in the lower 48, that doesn't happen that often because a lot of places are not sparsely populated. Where it does happen, you have crop dusters and you have helicopters. So they were trying to defend the under 500 feet, and I was trying to defend the under 500 feet for Alaskan pilots. Because as we pointed out to our program managers, everybody up here flies under 500 feet. And we had a program manager take an airplane ride while he was up here. The pilot was flying at 500 feet, and there were 2 planes below him. Wonderful introduction, welcome to Alaska aviation. But this is the type of thing that we need to be very conscious of as we are integrating, that there are already people in the airspace. So how do we interact and how do we make sure this is safe? So we're really focused on this, and every single one of our programs touches this. So let's start with the Center of Excellence for UAS Research. It's also known as ASSURE. It's the Alliance for Safety Systems, et cetera. Nobody remembers the acronym, it's ASSURE. We're working on things involving how do we do cargo safely in Alaska? How do we operate at airports safely? Make sure we're not interfering with the operations there. We're not interfering with routine scheduled operations, et cetera. How do we ensure it's all safe? That you're not putting an aircraft that doesn't have chalked wheels right next to a place where it could take off and hit something. Little things like that actually are really important. And of course, this flying beyond visual line of sight of the pilot in command. The FAA is terrified of this particular topic. And the reason is they're afraid if you cannot see the aircraft and the aircraft around it, you can hit somebody. And that is a legitimate, worry. Now, we do big sky calculations. The chance you would actually encounter, in our case, it is always a Cessna 172 that is put out there over the North Slope in the middle of nowhere. We can do the calculations. The chances you would find somebody is approximately 0. But because it is not absolutely 0, we are forced into that detect and avoid technology to make sure that if we lose link, we aren't going to hit the theoretical Cessna. We learned in the lower 48 it's not a Cessna, it's a Piper Cub. So we're doing a lot of testing here. We've done it out at Poker Flat. We've done it over the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. We've actually done some of it here in Fairbanks. And what we have found, among other things, is when you put out a notice to airspace and you happen to have a whole bunch of aircraft, Robbies and other aircraft flying through, and you have radars in a 360-degree direction, you will attract F-15s, among other things. They flew right through the middle of our experiment, gave our radar a really good test. But it is a case of we are using real aircraft to do this. The test site, I said we're one of 7. We have tentacles everywhere. So we're slowly trying to take over the entire United States. Because originally we were competed as the Pan-Pacific UAS Test Range Complex, us, Hawaii, Oregon. Well, since then, we have acquired Kansas, Mississippi, we've got ranges in California, we've got people flying all over the country with us. Why would we do that? It's because we've learned that people don't want to travel more than a day to be able to test their equipment. So that means our partners, we need to set up ranges near them or work with them to be able to operate. And of course, they are operating under us, so we are going to be the ones ensuring that they are flying safely. I really think our tagline should be, we won't do something stupid. We also want to make sure that people under us are not going to do something stupid. So we just don't give you carte blanche to go fly. We audit you, you have to do your paperwork, all those other good things. But in the process of that, we've developed a lot of good partners. So the test site had a competition for different aircraft and providers to do detect and avoid and other technologies. So we got partnered with Vigilant Aerospace. And what Vigilant does is they take a whole bunch of different detect and avoid sensors and feed them into one picture. So we've done operations with Vigilant. We have done it out over the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. Thank you, Alyeska. We've also done it at, I'm going to draw a complete blank, Bradley Field here in North Pole, where we set off the runway and we could watch aircraft come and go inside our field of view while maintaining safety because we were nowhere near that runway. And what we found is that they gave us a really nice look at where your aircraft is, what is called well clear, which is the big yellow thing. You don't want any aircraft into your well clear. So this tells you how you would have to move to avoid that aircraft and maintain well clear. And if you can't maintain well clear, that little red area is called the NMAC. This is where you do not want to go because your chances of actually hitting are really high. But this is something that is really important for us to be able to have this integration and be able to see. In this case, we had multiple radars feeding in, etc. We want that common operating picture. So because we've been doing all of this under the IPP, we actually did get the first, and every single word here is important, the first FAA approved, no human eyes on the aircraft, beyond visual line of sight waiver, under the small unmanned aircraft rule, in domestic airspace. Part 107, small unmanned aircraft rule. This one is important. That red circled thing says, basically the VO, visual observer, person who's supposed to be keeping an eye on the aircraft, may use unaided human vision, which is the gold standard, that you always have a human eye on the aircraft, or the detect systems described in the application. So now we don't have to have our eyes on the aircraft. We have to have our eyes on the computer screen that says where everybody else is. But this was the first time it had happened. Do you know how many FAA people it takes to make this happen? The answer is a lot. So keep in mind that the FAA has a limit on how many people can go on a trip based on value. They sent 7. That was the maximum they could send. But they were there, they got to watch us operate, and when we were done, they said, if there was a trusted operator program for drones, it would be us. High compliment from the FAA. They don't trust anybody because all of their regulations are written in blood, accidents. They don't want to do that, and they want to make sure that we're not going to do that either, which is why this process is going slowly. So Beyond, told you it was a follow-on from the IPP. We're one of 8. So we really are pushing the boundaries here because IPP was originally under 400 feet. Again, not really where we want to operate, but we wanted to make sure we were in the conversation. And they have let us push the boundaries. So we are the only program really doing large unmanned aircraft, large drones, things in FAA parlance bigger than 55 pounds. DoD has 5 classifications. FAA really has 2. Smaller than 55 and bigger than 55. And bigger than 55 can be anything from a 56-pound aircraft to a 747. It's not a small range. So we have a bunch of partners who are helping us here. And you'll notice a bunch of Alaskan companies in here. You'll also see some very important other companies in here. So, we've got everything from State of Alaska Department of Transportation and Public Facilities to Merck. You guys know what Merck is, right? Pharmaceutical company. So we have a range of partners here to really address a series of important issues for the state of Alaska. Let's start with pipeline monitoring. All right, we said already, we did the first flight there. I think it was this picture is actually the cover photo for the IPP final report. We're number 1. We won. We did more than everybody else. We went 3.9 miles. And yes, that number will come back. So in this particular case, we're working with multiple companies to be able to do operations over pipelines, power lines, et cetera. It's linear infrastructure monitoring. And where are we really starting? We're starting with the Trans-Alaska Pipeline System, TAPS. Our goal under Beyond is by the end of the program, which we're about 2 years in, we have about 2 years to go, is to fly the entire Trans-Alaska Pipeline in a single flight. We have the technology that can do it, we just don't have the detect and avoid yet. So we're working on that particular front. And our communications needs a little bit of improving too, in terms of how far apart we need to have transmitters to make sure that we have coverage the whole way. So we have an opportunity to do this testing, and the FAA has granted us permission to fly along a 20-mile section of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline to do that beyond visual line of sight testing where we don't have to have human eyes on the aircraft. This is really important. We can go out there, and as long as we've got ground-based radars out to make sure that the airspace is safe, we see anybody coming in or out, then we can go do a bunch of the testing that needs to happen. Type certification. Okay, this one causes people's eyes to roll back in the heads. Type certification is a geek out factor. So why did I throw it in a public lecture? Because type certification is the FAA approving that something is airworthy in the airspace. It is safe. Type certified aircraft include Cessnas, Boeing 737s, things that have long track records in terms of the safety. They know when they need to change a certain motor. They know when they have to do maintenance of a certain part. Drones don't have this track record. We haven't been doing stuff since 1956. So this is a case where we are working through the processes to be able to guarantee that these aircraft are safe. So they came up with a new process for small unmanned aircraft. So remember, 55 and below is small, called durability and reliability, and how many hours you have to fly is dependent on the size of your aircraft and how densely populated the area is. It also depends on what safety equipment you have to have on the aircraft. So a lot of these smalls that are trying to do some of this, they have parachutes on board. So if the engine's cut, the parachute pops, and you don't end up braining somebody on the ground. So what did we do on our first attempt at type cert? We didn't bring that nice electric under 55 pounds. No, we brought a hybrid under 55 pounds, and the FAA said, say what? So this is classic. We don't do anything normally up here. So that is something where we had to work with the FAA on this. We're also working with some other types of aircraft, ones that are not small, do not fall in this process. So basically, we're looking at the same process you would use to certify a Cessna. Seems to be a bit overkill, but you do happen to have some of the collision potential, especially if you're flying an unpiloted Cessna. So they're looking at those processes. How do we do this? Now, the advantage to starting with the Cessna Grand Caravan is it is a type certified aircraft. So we're just changing the type certification to account for the fancy autopilot. And we need to have that type certified aircraft to do cargo delivery. That is why this is important for Alaska, is because they're not going to let us fly beyond visual line of sight until they are sure that that aircraft is not going to cause a problem. And our holy grail is medical supply delivery to the villages. It is milk and diapers to the villages. This is not sexy stuff. This is not the burrito across campus. This is not pizza to your door. This is stuff that has the impact in terms of people's quality of life. So this to us is very important. And, you know, Amazon's complaining they have a last mile problem. We got you beat. We have a last hundreds of miles problem in terms of getting goods and services. So this is something we really want to move forward. Good news is we can fly sometimes when traditional aircraft can't, once we get all of the right equipment set up, et cetera, because we don't actually have to see out our window. We don't have to fly necessarily via visual flight rules. We're basically flying by instrument flight rules. Although they're now talking about them being called autonomous flight rules and adding a new part to the regulations. So stay tuned, this is going to get complicated. In our particular case, we want Alaskans to lead the way. So we're coupling with local air carriers to do this kind of work. An advantage, we can extend pilots' careers. Because when you can't pass a medical to actually fly the plane, you still are highly capable, and your knowledge of where the winds are in Rainy Pass or Isabel Pass is still essential for safe operation through that area. So we like to say that we can extend pilots' careers. Now, some pilots don't feel that that's really piloting and they always want to be flying it themselves. We understand that. Our folks fly too. Back to all of our remote pilots are actually pilots, they understand that. But it is something that potentially could provide an avenue forward. So to move on that, we need to start integrating with the traditional aviation in various places. Excuse me here. So this May, we did our first large unmanned aircraft operation off of Fairbanks International Airport. So this is the Sentry, and she's 400 pounds, 12-foot wingspan. And I'm not sure who was more excited, us or the airport. So it was one of those cases where it was a non-event event, which is what you want. We had a whole bunch of people come see what we were up to, and it still worked, which, when demonstrated for the repairman type thing, you never expect it to go well if you've got a whole VIP audience. Went very well, and air traffic control said it was seamless. We were like any other aircraft. Yes. There was a flight instructor in the pattern with us. He said we were handled like any other aircraft. Again, exactly what we want. So this was really exciting, and I still owe the airport a barbecue for all of the help they gave us in crowd control, etc. And our next step is Fairbanks to Nenana. So we have permission to fly at Fairbanks, we have permission to fly at Nenana. We just received permission to fly between the two. So this will be coming, knock on wood, this fall. So stay tuned for press releases. Now, all of these things are baby steps here. We've done a lot of these flights in Canada, to the order of over 22,000 nautical miles of beyond visual line of sight flights. What was the number I gave you a moment ago for the Trans-Alaska Pipeline? 3.9 miles was the furthest we'd gone. 20 miles, you're right, is how long our section is, but we haven't flown the full thing. So we have a lot of practice doing this, and we're flying via satellite communications. So we flew up in Inuvik. We imaged the entire Inuvik-Tuktoyaktuk Highway. We broke a whole bunch of data analysis products. And we actually now have free storage with one of the companies because we improved their product so much. But we have done all sorts of things. We've looked for channel markers, we've looked for beluga whales, and a whole bunch of other missions that we have done here. We're learning in all of this, and we're working with Transport Canada and Nav Canada. Those are their equivalents of the FAA. So we are getting refined in our aircraft and what we're doing in Canada, and taking that information and feeding it back to the FAA. And of course, thumbing our noses at them at the same time, because that's what we do. Saying, why can't you let us do this? So these are some of the images, and they give you an idea of how high you're flying. So you asked how high we were going. Someone asked that earlier today. So that top left photo is from 3,500 feet. The one below it, 3,000. The one on the right, 1,500. So with Sea Hunter, we have actually set the record for how high she goes at 15,003 feet. And we have done a lot of work with her. And we are just like any other aircraft in terms of if you want to look for us. So our team next week is out there to fly again. How do I determine whether or not they're flying that day without actually bugging them? I pull up FlightAware, which is a common program. You can use it to find flights anywhere in the country. So if I'm flying Fairbanks to Seattle, I can look it up in FlightAware. Plug in our aircraft's tail numbers, because we're registered in the national airspace. And it will pull up where our aircraft is in the pattern. So I know whether or not the guys are flying, know where the aircraft is, and I don't have to bug them, which is the way you want it to be. The less they hear from the boss when they're actually operating in the field, the better. And this is what we're doing. So, can anybody spot a whale in that picture? Hint, I can't. Nick put his hands up because Nick is a brat. This is why I love working with him. So the answer is you can't really spot the whale. But the artificial intelligence payload we are running on board the Sea Hunter can. So that is an underwater whale that was spotted by our program. This particular system now can determine North Atlantic right whale versus other kinds of whales, and in some of the pictures determine gender from 2,000 feet. So at that point, when it spots one, it sends an alert back to the marine mammal folks for the Department of Fisheries and Oceans in Canada, and they will slow the shipping in the St. Lawrence Seaway to keep that whale from getting hit. There are only 400 of these whales in existence, and their primary method of death is boat strike. So up until now, Transport Canada has been doing this using a Dash 8, which is an ice jet, with people looking out the windows. Well, we can now do this remotely, and we've improved aviation safety because now you don't have pilots and biologists out over the ocean. We're Alaskans. All of us know somebody who has died doing mammal monitoring of some sort, whether it be wolves or sheep or ice seals. So this makes that a whole lot safer. And so we're back. So as I said, next week, N372 UA and N347 UA, and we will be identifying where we are. So we're going to add to our over 22,000 nautical miles BVLOS. We usually put on about 5,000 miles BVLOS per one of these missions. We're also doing disaster response, back to that Center of Excellence for UAS research. So we are working with a whole bunch of folks about, okay, if we have an earthquake in Anchorage, how do all of the different groups with drones, whether they be civilian, they be FEMA, they be Department of Transportation, how does everybody come together to get the data that is needed without interfering with each other? And who has what assets that they can leverage? So we are designing concepts of operations and doing tabletop exercises and seminars, and we're going to do some live exercises where we bring everybody together and work it out ahead of time so that when a disaster hits, we can respond. This program is being led out of the University of Alabama, Huntsville, but most of the missions that are actually being flown are being done where? That would be us. So we're looking at doing pandemic response, so medical supply delivery to remote communities. We are looking at doing wildfire response, and there's some earthquake, and then the East Coasters have the tornado hurricane mission. Now, those aren't the only ones we've done. We're looking at a whole range of anthropogenic, meaning human-induced and natural disasters, but most of them will not go to the actual flight stage. They will be tabletops and seminars. But it's going to really help bring that coordination together. The other thing is we've got a really good geoscientist who is working on avalanches. So using unmanned aircraft and looking at how the snow builds up over the winter and where you're going to have high avalanche potential. Needless to say, Alaska Railroad is very interested in this. Department of Transportation and Public Facilities has been funding it. They're 100% behind figuring out where do we need to put explosives in order to protect Seward Highway, a whole bunch of other key spots. So disaster response is going to be key here. Of course, we're also operating in the Arctic, which means we have a whole set of challenges nobody else has. So, as we all know, in the middle of winter, depending on where you are, Fairbanks, we're not usually windy, but if you happen to be up in Ukqiavik, it can be cold, dark, and windy. We've got poor GPS, various places, poor satellite coverage. We have had to work out where every satellite was in the sky to make sure we had enough command and control in a fjord. So you time it for when all the satellites can reach and you can actually have good communications. Icing of airframes and payloads. If you're flying a camera and it ices over, what's your imagery? Pretty bad. Exposed pilots and observers. I'm a little sensitive to this one because when we actually operate in the field, the pilots, the payload experts, they're the important people. They're doing like real work. They get to stay inside the trailer, which has the heater. I am the lowest person on the totem pole at that point operationally, so I'm one of the people who could get tagged for observer. So I'm keenly aware that the observer gets cold. Battery life is significantly degraded. We have learned all sorts of tricks in terms of using chemical hand warmers to keep your batteries warm. Coolers, awesome for keeping batteries warm. Not the way you normally think of a cooler, but if you stick some hand warmers in, you stick the batteries in, they're kept warm until you pull them and put them on the aircraft. We have things like containers that will go around the batteries, again, to help keep them warm. Because otherwise, as we all know, if you happen to have something, it's a cold battery, you're not going to get much cranking power. And we actually like to have some endurance to our aircraft. And the difference between a 30-minute flight and a 15-minute flight is actually significant, especially if you're doing something like search and rescue. So it's really important that we figure out how to overcome these. One of the cool things is we keep getting reach outs from members of the US military, a whole bunch of other companies with, how do you actually do this? Because most people aren't flying under the conditions we fly. And so it is a continuing dialogue about how do we do better. Now, if you're talking to Arctic nations like Norway, we're just comparing notes. And we've all kind of come up with the same type of things. But people who come up from the lower 48 or some other country aren't used to these conditions. And things we do, they're not used to, they don't think about. Now, I will admit there are some funny responses on this. And I'm going to call out Nick again. We had a German general, Norwegian general, who asked, what's the difference in flying an unmanned aircraft during day and night? Nick's response is, we turn on the lights in the trailer. And he was actually correct. With some of the operations we do, that's how simple it is. But if you're dealing with cold and dark and a whole bunch of those other issues, we test things at temperatures that the manufacturer would never dream of. And some things work beautifully, and some things crash. Luckily, literally, I don't think we've had any burn. But it's definitely something where it is a case of trial and error and learning and figuring out ways around it. And Alaskans are nothing but ingenious in terms of coming up with ways around it. Gravel and icy runways. All right, this is huge. If you have a fancy big plane with $1 million payload and you put it on a gravel runway, what happens? The answer is we don't know, because nobody wants to do that testing. We know from experience that on a gravel runway, you're going to get gravel kicked up and it could hit your payload and destroy it. So you want to make sure you have some way to protect the payload. We also know that you can have cases where you don't have the right tires and landing can be a problem. Again, this is something we need to operate in the Arctic, right? How many paved runways are in Alaska? Not most of them. If you're flying up on the North Slope, you're going to encounter a lot of gravel runways. Heck, here in the interior, it's a lot of gravel runways. So it's a case where being able to operate under those conditions is important. Significant manned aircraft activity. Do not try to run a drone operation the day before hunting season anywhere in Alaska, because everybody's out flying looking for where the moose are before they go hunting the next day. And they're all flying where? Under 500 feet. So we've learned, be prepared depending on the time of year, season, etc. This can be a challenge. And I put polar bears on here not just to be funny. Up at Elliptic Point, the Air Force had a case where somebody was mauled. So it is something you pay attention to. You need your bear guards if you're operating on the ice. This is something that folks in the lower 48 are like, you're kidding, right? Nope, we know we're not top of the food chain up here. And the biggest one of all, beyond visual line of sight permitting. Back to that BVLOS challenge. That is the biggest challenge we have. And then we have just a whole bunch of other things. And people forget that we just can't, hop, skip, and a jump to a hardware store. We had one major mission. They'd taken in a C-130 full of equipment. They forgot one box. That was a whole separate charter flight to get that one box out. You couldn't just go around the corner and pick up what you needed. So, what are we doing in the Arctic? We are here and able to test. We are a perfect test bed. And we are, as I said, developing a whole bunch of things, techniques to really look at how can we overcome these challenges. And we're developing a whole bunch of payloads to go with the science. Being able to study snow depth, being able to count marine mammals, all of those other things. So we've done testing. So this is actually at the NASA Glenn Icing Research Tunnel. That is part of our Sea Hunter wing. And so we got a spare Sea Hunter wing from Griffin Aerospace, set it up in the tunnel, was working with NASA. They modeled where they thought the ice would form. We ran the measurements, they've scanned it and confirmed their model and worked to improve it. Why? Because icing is a major problem for drones, just like it is for traditional aircraft. Does that stop us from operating? No, we just make sure we don't fly where there's icing. Now, how good are the meteorological models out over the ocean? Not really good. So it's an art form to determine when and where you should fly up north. We were lucky to have a flight campaign, and thank you, ConocoPhillips, for letting us use your hangar. Their pilots initially were very skeptical of our program, and by the end, they decided I think we were okay. But it was a case where our Sea Hunter there, bottom left, looks like a walrus. She's got tusks. That's actually a meteorological sensor. And we were doing flights out looking at the ground and this really sea ice, but we got that beautiful Pingo picture in the bottom center.
Yeah.
And of course, we were dealing with icing, et cetera. But we didn't get many flight days because we had to have a chase plane for part of the flight, and it was difficult to get the plane from Dead Horse to Kuparik to go with us. And also the meteorological situation wasn't great. Now we have a sensor on board Sea Hunter that tells us when we're in icing conditions. That's a pretty good get out of here now condition. When we used to fly Scan Eagle up north, we had a clear dome on her, and you could, by looking at the imagery, watch the dome start to ice, which was a pretty good indicator that you needed to kind of get out of there like now. So it is something where we are working on improving the predictions. We're looking at anti-icing coatings and active de-icing systems to make this much safer. Now the good news is, if you happen to have a great big aircraft like a Predator, they've got a pretty good de-icing system. Smalls, we don't have much power. It's a bigger challenge. And when you do it, you can do flights out of the Arctic, and you can do things like this. So this was actually using a small hexacopter up near Reykjavik, and this is a map of sea ice. So you can see where leads were. Very, very important. If you're doing a ship, how do you get through this massive ice? And we've participated with folks doing some Arctic testing. So what that is an unmanned aircraft known as Vanilla on board a truck, and it is a truck launch. So you drive down the runway, release the aircraft when it's got enough speed, and up it goes. And they set a record for endurance during one of these operations. But we're working on being able to operate at airports out of the Arctic and other places on the coast in order to access the permanent working areas set aside by the US Senate and in conjunction with ICAO. So ICAO is the International Aerospace Organization. Now the challenge is, guess what? Do we need to get in there? We need type certified aircraft. How many type certified aircraft exist? I didn't tell you that in the earlier discussion, did I? Anybody know? 2 have modified type certifications, Scan Eagle and Puma, and that is it. So we can't operate in those areas yet. We can go out to the 12-mile limit. We can't fly beyond it. If we fly beyond it, we need to have that type certified aircraft. So we can't do it. Some of the other things we're doing, education. So University of Alaska is working on unmanned aircraft programs across the system. UAA is doing a remote pilot with operations over people expertise. We here at UAF are doing a certificate in drone operations, and we've got an aerospace engineering minor. We're adding an aerospace engineering major. UAS is doing drones and environmental studies. And I am actually grateful that we went away from unmanned aircraft, because having UAS be University of Alaska Southeast and unmanned aircraft systems was a pain. And then the Arctic working areas, the in and out, they decided to call unmanned aircraft activity areas. So we had UAA. So UAF was flying UAS in the UAA.
Yeah.
No. Step back. I think they were trying to make my brain explode. So there's a lot of activity here, and we want to make sure that we are providing opportunities for the kids in our state to be able to do high-tech jobs that let them stay here. And so we're doing a whole bunch of STEM events to get them excited about unmanned aircraft, about drones, but also to sneak in a little teaching about, science, engineering, math. But also, if you're going to be doing some of this, you also need to be able to communicate. So we tell them, you need to take writing courses. You need to take communications courses. And this is something they're like, why would you want to do that? Well, because you're going to need to go do stuff and tell it to the person who hired you to do it. Or you need to be able to run the business and tell your stakeholders what you're doing. So it really is a case where it is a well-rounded education that will set you up for success in a lot of this. And it's something that I know for our team, we love working with the students. It is more fun to go do STEM outreach. It sure beats writing proposals, like yours. But it is something that is very, very important that we have pathways to get our students from, 4th and 5th graders all the way into college to do this type of activity. And we're looking at developing programs in the next couple years that really will do the reach in and work on bringing folks up and setting them up for success in college. So what's next? Well, we're busy. So the governor and the state legislature put some money into the state budget for ACUASI this year. And needless to say, because the governor put it in, it survived the governor taking it out. And so what are we pushing on this year? What's our priority? Hiring instructors to be able to deliver the curriculum. Some of these courses, our drone courses, are delivered distance delivery to UAA. So the engineering courses will be taught at UAA and UAF, and they will have aircraft being built in both locations. And so it's a case where you're working between the different universities. Bigger bang for the buck, right? We're going to be doing distance delivery courses. We need some people who can handle those. We want to be able to deliver them across the state and then only have people come in for an intensive hands-on. Because right now, you can actually get certified as a remote pilot having never touched an unmanned aircraft. Anybody see a problem with this? I kind of do. So this would be a case where we can get first responders, we can get other people interested in flying to actually come get hands-on experience from the folks in ACUASI who know how to do this. And we want to identify and start developing emerging technologies test ranges. We want to have places around the state where Alaskan business people, students, et cetera, can test new technologies in a safe environment with some of the best in the world. And so we are looking at setting up 3 of these ranges. And what do we want to do? Remember, we said you don't want to go more than a day from where you happen to live. So where do we want to put some? Well, you want to put one down by Anchorage, but anybody who knows the Anchorage airspace, you don't want to put anything in the Anchorage airspace because there are so many different airports, the airspace is complex. So let's look at places like Palmer, where you're outside. Now, do we have wind problems in Palmer? Frequently. Is that a good test bed? The answer would be if you're going to operate in Alaska, probably. So we'll work on some of those things. But we have a lot of people who are interested in this. So let's get them engaged, let's give them a variety of climates, and let's move it forward. And we're really going to push that DAA. We're going to be pushing the cargo, we're pushing the pipeline monitoring. We really want to move this forward. The Beyond program has another 2 years and several months. We want to push this as fast as possible while we have those accelerated permissions. So that is going to be a prime focus for this year and this funding. So in the next 6 months, we're going to be busy. So we're going to assist partners with flying the first Cessna Grand Caravans. We are going to fly our first drone mission between Fairbanks and Anana. Now, all of this is contingent on everything going right. We're already in Canada for the whale monitoring. We're looking at doing campaigns for drone detection, tracking, and identification. So can you spot them in the airspace to determine who might be a hazard? We're going to work with the State of Alaska Department of Transportation to improve safety in the airspace here in Alaska. And we're going to continue to conduct STEM outreach across Alaska, which is, as we said, near and dear to our hearts. This is going to impact the drone economy in Alaska. We are trying to set the foundation in terms of workforce, in terms of capability and technology, to really put Alaska as the place for drones. And we can transition all the technology from us to other places, but let's do it here first. Our ground hazard is minimal. We're not flying over big cities for most of our testing. It's safer, it just makes sense to do it. Plus, we're kind of the final exam. If you can't operate in Fairbanks in winter, you are not going to be able to operate throughout the United States. You'd be limited to other places. If you can survive here, you can probably operate almost anywhere. Now, Yuma, Arizona, in the middle of summer, we might have challenges. Opposite end of the spectrum. And of course, we want to be able to take everything we learn and transition it to Alaskan companies. We want Alaskans first here. Now, what else is on our horizon? This would be counter drone. What's counter drone? It is identifying a threat drone and being able to basically take care of it. Now, do we have the ability to push the button and take it out? The answer is no. Only 5 agencies in the United States do: Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Justice, Department of Energy, and only at 5 airports for testing FAA. Because everybody is concerned that in the process of doing these things, you're going to have collateral damage. You don't want to try to take down a drone by jamming it and take out the Cessna behind it. So this is something where we are helping really establish the detection, the identification, and the monitoring pieces so that we can determine the best way to actually spot the drone, identify where the operator is, etc., to help law enforcement to do all of these different protection aspects. So it's something we've just stuck our toe in the water. Senator Murkowski got us Department of Justice earmark to help law enforcement in places across the state with identifying where drones are operating in their area and whether it's careless and clueless. So like you have a whole bunch of launches from a park near an airport at 3 o'clock right when the school gets out. I wonder who's flying those. You can go intercept and talk to the kids about the dangers and do education and hopefully stop that problem. Or you can identify that somebody happens to be flying around your power plant in the middle of the night. You might have more concerns about what they're up to. So something to pay attention to, and something, of course, that's come to the forefront with what's going on in Ukraine. Because counter drone would be important in a situation where you've got drones causing challenges. So we're doing a whole lot of interesting stuff here. The field is moving forward. We really want Alaska to continue to lead the way. And so with that, I'm going to say thank you. And are there any questions? Dead silence. I put them all to sleep. Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Cathy. That was amazing. Do you partner with European countries?
So we have to be a little bit careful because of the technology we use. There are certain rules that we can't transition certain technologies that have military applications to other countries. But where things are open and free, yes, we do. So we have done work with Norway. We have done things with Australia. We've done work with Iceland. So it really is a function of who we're talking to and what the area of the technology is. But yes, we do collaborate with other countries.
Thanks, Cathy. Great talk. Just recently, Amazon is going to be delivering in Lodi. And so where do you see some of that application happening here in Alaska?
So with a lot of the Amazon testing, they're doing relatively short hops right now. We know that they want to take over the world. That's what Amazon does. But right now they're only allowed by FAA to do some very limited areas. And it's under 5 pounds of weight. It's within a certain area. And some of their systems do have rudimentary detect and avoid, and often they'll have parachutes. But it is something that right now this testing really is, a lot of it is social acceptance. Because you don't necessarily want a whole bunch of drones buzzing over your head, delivering lattes to your neighbors. Some people are willing to accept that, other people are a little less forgiving. Alaskans unforgiving translates to shooting things. So we know this is a challenge. In fact, when we first really started talking drones here in Alaska in the 2014 timeframe, the legislature actually put a frequently asked question booklet out about drones. And it says, can I shoot it? And they said no, and they proceeded to list out all the federal statutes why you can't. And it includes aircraft sabotage and aircraft piracy and a whole bunch of other things. And it's, up to 20 years imprisonment and $200,000 in fines. And everyone's like, but you'll never catch me. Well, if you happen to have a really good camera payload on that, the last picture could be you shooting it. So it is a case that we don't recommend that. But in terms of that testing, there is a big question about the public acceptance. We do know they want to be able to do hub and spoke everywhere in the country for these smaller aspects. And there are some challenges because some of them are doing winch downs, which dogs and kids and other people can pull on those, which is a problem with the aircraft since it's attached. So there are a whole bunch of different aspects here, and we'll have to see really what the acceptance rate is. The other one that's going to have some of those challenges is urban air mobility, which are air taxis. And they're talking about doing air taxi operations in like the Bay Area of California and in big cities. Well, a lot of the big cities have already banned helicopters because they got tired of all the noise of people going, rooftop to rooftop. We think there's going to be a similar pushback about urban air mobility. We think what's called regional air mobility, which is airport to airport, fairly short hops, will probably be accepted first. But we'll see what happens. It really is a grand social experiment. All right, then thank you, everybody.